Hello everyone, I'm going to be reviewing project-based learning in the digital age based on our book Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age. So chapter 3 was mostly about imagining the possibilities. The main concept I got from this chapter was, what is the big idea? What is the purpose of your project? Why do your students want to do it? So finding that part of the project is, what do you want your students to learn? What are the 2 to 3 main things that are important in relevance to this project, keeping in mind the standards and the activities that you want your students to accomplish without being overbearing on the rules and regulations. It's really important to plan, obviously, to analyze what you want your students to know, to evaluate their growth and their the way they put together their projects. So formative assessments, summative assessments, keeping track of their assessments online, making sure that they're up to date, and making sure that their projects are realistic and valuable to their lives instead of just fancy things that tie in the knowledge and the content that's required of them. So the description of literacy is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute using printed and written materials associated with varying concepts. So changing that to digitally really expands the amount of knowledge that the students can grasp and the quality of their projects, because they have access to so many different things. They can research what is interesting to them about the project, how they can apply it to something that's relevant to their life or in the world around them, and knowing and valuing all of that as well. One more thing to keep in mind is the learning dispositions or the habits of mind, as the authors Susie Boss, and Jane Krause kind of mentioned that habits of mind are things that we normally do, as in learning dispositions, but how can we expand that? So chapter 3 continued, is, why should our students care? What about this project is going to make them really want to dive in and really want to take control and make it really meaningful? Some of the essentials that students should be keeping in mind, as well as teachers, are research, visible ideas, creative expression, collaboration of group. I know that one is really hard because group projects can tend to be very one-sided. So instead of just assigning it as a group, assign it as a group, but also individualize the project. So have one student in charge of certain tasks or certain things. That way you can assess that student on what they were supposed to do, as well as the group as a whole. Project management and time management, I added that in there as well because that could be really relevant, especially to high school students being lazy and just not wanting to do their work. Reflection and iteration, supported study, and enrichment. So being available for your students, having meaningful resources for your students, whether that be online, in class, before school, after school, anything that you can give to them. Chapter 4, strategies for discovery. So being selective about the quality. So the example they used in the book was, instead of just having the students figure out some work and then put it on a slideshow, that can be really nice quality, but the content of the work quality, not just the display quality. Some of the pitfalls that they discussed were long activity and minimal learning, so having a project last 3 months and the student's not really getting anything out of it. Emphasis on technology instead of material. So that was another example that tied into the previous one. Thematic units, not interdisciplinary. So, if you were doing a banking unit and everything was about banking, but it didn't mesh into like math into English or history into math, science into English, etc. It was just very single-sided. I'm trying not to have that. overly scripted rubric. So you definitely want your students to be creative. You don't want to be the creative one. Letting them know what they need to know and what the requirements are, and having them come up with it the rest on their own. That way it's more meaningful to them. And then there's unauthentic and not enough focus on assessment. It's really important for students to be evaluated because this is how they're going to be judged. This is how their projects and work is going to be judged in real life. So letting them know that and being able to tie that in is really important as well. Some of the best projects share important features. So whether that be from previous projects, projects throughout the class, or any other type of project, students should be tapping into their previous knowledge of other disciplines and the discipline that you may be working on them with, and keeping all of that in mind while creating this new problem or answer that they're creating for a problem. It's also very important to collect and track the assessments online, just because you want to make sure that the students aren't procrastinating and putting it all on each other, making sure that they're staying on topic, staying on time, giving them a timeline that they need to answer to, which also is something that's going to be happening in their lives after school. Making assessments meaningful, chapter 5. So this was something I really struggled with in school. I hated assessments because I always asked, what is the point? Why am I doing this? Why is this relevant? I'm never going to use this. Growing up, for me, it was always about the test. You have to know this because of the test. I really didn't like that because I was like, oh, I'm never going to use this test. Which I didn't, but I did use a lot of the things that I've learned in my life, and most of the things that I remembered were because of different projects or different activities that we did instead of just worksheets. So we're going to start over here with authentic and realistic assessments. Making sure that you're giving students something that is valuable, but not only valuable, something that's actually attainable, not throwing them something that they're like a statistics project to a 5th grade class that they would never be able to understand because it's not fair to them or to you, or from you. It's also important to measure learning in a summative way, evaluate quality, and suggest realistic improvements, not just improvements to say, maybe fix this, this, and this, or what if we expanded it to a whole nother project. Definitely allow your students to be in charge. Just offer little tidbits of advice. As I said previously, plan for formative and summative assessments. You definitely do not want to give your students a project if they already know exactly how to do every part of it. It kind of defeats the purpose. So evidence objective activities. This was a circle and a cycle that the author discussed, making sure that your evidence, objective, and activities are always constantly moving around in a circle. This next part I thought was really interesting because they discussed school-wide and project-specific rubrics. I've always understood project-specific rubrics, but school-wide was a little intriguing to me. So the way that they explained it was having like a set of values or a certain set of things that you always want to have for all of your students. That way they know what's expected of them every year. They know what they need to do for all of their projects, but making sure that your own projects for the students are your rubrics are tailored to fit the needs of your class. And then lastly, making sure you give your students feedback in time, not giving them feedback after halfway through their next project because they're not going to be able to use that feedback that you're giving them in the beginning of their project, which is kind of useless because then they'd have to go back and redo it, which is a waste of time. And I wouldn't like that if my teachers did that to me. Online gradebooks, so the students can go and reflect their feedback and their grades given. And reviewing work samples, letting the students know what was good and what needed improvement on everything that they've done in class. Making sure that they completely understand what is being asked of them and that their work samples are valued and correct. So just because a student's doing a project, say based on weather, and they got some calculations wrong, it's probably important that they figure that out, because the end of their project wouldn't be that correct if they didn't know how to do it right. So again, that is reinventing project-based learning in the digital age.